Welcome to video from thislifestyle.com. This is a Opsix tutorial, and this is actually one that was inspired by a commenter on my getting started guide for the Opsix, which I've just recently got. This is on the Opsix Native. Essentially what was asked was, can I do the same sort of getting started but with the native version, which I thought was a good idea. I've had the native version for a while, never really got into it. Now I'm using the actual Opsix. I understand the native a lot better actually. So let's have a look at it. So the Opsix, if you didn't know, is altered FM synthesis, call it. It's using the FM synthesis in the way that was used on the DX7 in the 80s, classic synth, but with a difference, it's got a lot of extra features in there. So not only can you reproduce those classic FM sounds, and many of them are in here, and I suppose I should play at least one of them, and you've got those classic FM sounds on there. It can do a lot more with that because it doesn't just do FM. It's got ring modulation, it's got analog style filters in there, you've got wavefolding, so there's so much more that it can do, which gives you a really wide range of sounds. For example, here's one. Doesn't sound like FM, it sounds like virtual modeling, like synth modeling technology. So that one, so this one, for example, using cone filters, it sounds like, you know, analog modeling technology, some kind of synth modeling technology. And then I've got some analog synth type sounds on here. Let me find a good one. There's your traditional analog synth lead sound. Okay, so getting started with the Opsix. Well, it's got a lot going on in the interface, which is a good thing because you need access to it, sort of everything in one place. Whereas when you're doing it on the Opsix itself, you're kind of paging through. So in fact, it makes it easier. What you do miss on this one is access to the sliders, which I found invaluable when I'm doing the sound design. I know you've got them here, but I just find it so easy. But it's you can still program it exactly as you would do on the hardware. So it's FM synthesis, but like I said earlier, not like your traditional FM synthesis. It could do a lot more, but you can emulate those. So one of the things you can do is import sounds from the DX7 SysEx and bring them in. And in fact, I find it a little bit easier than I did on the Opsix, but we'll come to that in a moment. But the question was sort of from the comment on the get started video: how do you get started with this? Well, because yeah, it looks like there's a lot going on here. So I like to start with an initial program and sort of build the sound up. But I would say if you are getting started, then the first thing you'll do is have a play with some of the factory sounds on here, because they give you a really nice feel of what's available. Put the headphones on. So you can hear you've got those great keys, strings, you've got those classic FM sounds, but you've also got other sounds which sound nothing like FM. And there are some great patches on here, and I recommend going through those and on learning some of those. That doesn't sound particularly like FM to me, but it's great sound. But let me do it how I would learn it, which is to starting from the beginning. So I've got an initial patch. I'll turn everything right. So you've got your sine wave. So FM, in case you didn't know, the way that it works is you get carriers and modulators. So instead of having oscillators, you've got carriers and modulators. You've got 6 of those. 6 are called operators. So you've got 6 operators, and then basically the way is one operator can modify the other one, and you hear the output of that, and that's frequency modulation, which is kind of like phase modulation, and that's how you hear the change of the sound. they then use algorithms to decide the order of these blocks and the way that they pass the sound between each other. And here you can see all the different algorithms that are available. Plus you can make your own algorithms as well, which is really interesting. And I've got a couple of sort of interesting ones from that. But let me start off with something simple. So we've got the default one here. What I'm going to do is, well, it's already turned off. Everything's turned off apart from operator 1, which is a carrier. So we only hear carriers. So if I turn operator 1 down and turn operator 2 up, we won't hear anything, because operator 2 is a modulator to operator 1, and it's operator 1 that we need to hear. We can change it, but that's what we want to hear. So if I go back and put operator 1 on again, we can hear that sine wave. Now the original DX7 was FM, and it's always sine waves. When the Yamaha introduced the TX81Z and the DX11 later on, they introduced multi waveforms, so you can have sawtooth and triangles. Those synths were actually 4 operator synths, which there were DXs which were just 4 operators with sine waves. The original, my DX100, which they've got over there, just has the 4 operators and not 6. The DX9 had 4 as well, and they had cut down envelopes and some other restrictions to make them cheaper. And actually I had to go and successfully recreated some DX100 sounds on here. There's a great solid bass, and I actually did that by putting the DX100 here and sort of copying them over, manually typing the values into the Opsix and recreating those. There isn't an exact match, so I've recreated it. But anyway, if I increase the output of operator 2, which is the modulator, we will then hear the sound change, and you can actually see it on the screen, which is nice, which I do like the analyzer. I use it on the hardware version. You've got a spectrum analyzer here, and you've got the waveform analyzer there. Now, what makes a difference between with these is the increased level of the modulator adds more harmonic overtones to the sine wave. So if I go down, you can hear as I increase that, you can hear and see it adds the extra harmonics in there, like that. The other combination with that is the frequency. So this is in ratio. So when we have that down like that, we can hear it going up. But we could actually increase double that, or go up in factor 12 and go all the way up. Let's leave it at 1 for now. Let's have the other operator on now, and let's increase that operator's frequency. So you can hear what's happening now. As I double it, we get double the harmonics, and you can actually see them coming on there, can't you? Straight away we're into the bell type tones of FM. Now there's different ways of doing these ratios, can have different effects. So that one was the I can go lower as well, and in fact it's really good if you go very low. You can see the effect it has. So that is into LFO range now, and you can see the effect it's having on the waveform there. If I increase it, you can hear it stops being an LFO really, and into audio rate, and now it becomes audio effects. If I was making bass sounds, you can see how you would drop the frequency ratio of the modulator to do that. But what happens if we leave that and increase this one? We don't hear the frequency going up like you would expect. So if it was an analog synth and you increase the 1632, the octave, is what you expect to go up. But what we just seem to get is more overtones and harmonics in there, and higher ones. If we want to actually increase the pitch, it seems to be we do it on the modulator. So bear that in mind, because one of the other pitch controls, and if we go to the pitch section here, the pitch view, we've got a detune. So later on we'll be doing some detunes, and if I started detuning the carriers, you wouldn't hear that much actually. If you detune the modulators, then you hear quite a bit. So while we're on pitch, we've got the ratios. We don't have to have it on ratios, we can have it on fixed. So if I take that one down, make that fixed, you can actually set the frequency, so it's always the same frequency. and you can choose what frequency that is. Now, if we introduce the modulator, you'll hear the modulator's frequency there. So we've got the pitch moving as before, but now the carrier is static. It's kind of an interesting effect as well. So you can use that in a number of different ways, and you can do it both ways as well. So I can have that fixed. You get some really interesting harmonics over there, and where it gets more useful is when you start doing pitch envelopes and LFO to try and bring all this together. So I've got that sort of quite harsh belly type sound on there, but that's what you've got in pitch controls. You've got fine and detunes on there, and a transpose as well. Pitch modulation, you can choose how you want that to go. So you can have it an LFO, you can have velocity, and you can have an envelope. We'll come back to that in a sec. And then we've got level modulation. So we can do that through the velocity or an LFO. And we've got envelopes on them. Unlike the DX7, which has got multi-stage envelopes, these are fairly, well, these are traditional ADSR envelopes. A little bit, I miss the complexity of the DX envelopes, but I must admit they are a bit, they are complicated, and at first they can put you off. ADSR is simple, but it's got the original DX7 has got some nice things like key release and things like that. You can have some nice sort of twangy effects on there, but we've got standard ADSR, so we can do it level. So if I go back to my sine wave and I can change this and make a nice sort of that bow type soft sound, that's on the carrier. If I just put it back now, if we do the same thing on the modulator, let's put that, instead of being volume, especially if I put a bit of stay on there, we hear the complexity change because we're applying that FM modulation. So I could bring that sustain down. You should hear it going up in complexity and down. And of course, if I go to a sharp attack, we're into the bell type territory. So that's the other thing we've got. We've also got key tracking as well, so we can have reduced modulation at the lower levels and then higher at the top end, or the other way. Which actually sounds a bit better in this case, I think. So let's subtly make it a bit more subtle. So there's a couple of, so these are the parameters we've got on here. The other thing we've got are, we can copy and paste them, which is always really nice, but we can actually change these. So on FM, on the DXs, you only had FM. On here, you've got these different types, and these all do different things. So I'll use those in a sec, I think. We'll come back to that. Right, so other things we've got down here that are worth pointing out before we go on as well. We've got an analog style filter after the output of this. So, and there's 24 pole, 12 put, there's a 12 dB and a 24 dB filters. You've got an MS-20 style filter, PolySix, and we've got high passes and band passes. So after we make all this sound, we can then push it through a filter, something that you couldn't do on the DX7, which is really nice. It adds another level to it, which we'll look at later, and you can control that through the filter and the resonance. You can control them through envelopes and LFOs, and there's something called virtual patching as well, which we might get to look at later. So we've got 3 envelopes as well, sort of master envelopes that we can play with. One, it tends to be used for pitch, one for filter, and a spare one as well. So we can use that through this virtual patching. And we've also got 3 LFOs as well. And it gets same kind of thing, pitch, filter and a spare. And then we've got the effects section here. We've got some really nice effects on there, which I'll show you later. Right, let's go back to FM programming now. So I created kind of a nice belly type sound. Now this is where the algorithms can get interesting. What I would like to do is to have that sort of trick you would do with an analog synth, have 2 oscillators detuned to give you sort of a warmer sound. So we can achieve that. So I know we've been using 1 pair here. We could do that again with this pair and then we'd have some spare, or we could look at the algorithm list and find another one that does us something different. So this one, for example, gives us 3 pairs. So we could use that so we can get 3 identical sort of carrier modulator combinations and do different things with them. Here you can have one with a stack of 3 and 2 stacks of 3. I think for our sound, what I'm going to do is I want to do the stack on one and make the other one slightly more complex. I'm going to stick with operator 1, with algorithm 1 for now. So let's show you what I mean by the detuning. So I can copy this. This is where it gets nice and easy, really. You can just paste these. So say I want it on 3, don't I? So let's paste it on there. So 3 is a mirror of 1 and 4 is a mirror of 2. Let's just turn down that first pair. So there's that second pair we can hear now. But let's detune it and bring the other one back in. So you can hear what I mean about the detuning. So now what we can do, we can make operator 4 a more complex waveform to give us more interesting effects. But what we could do with that, so let me just show you what I mean. So if I increase, I'm going to turn down operator 1 again. So listen. Because as we're turning up operator 5, that's modifying operator 4, which itself becomes more complex, and then it's do more modulation operator 3. So what might be interesting with that one is to make the bell perhaps very complex at the beginning and less so at the end. So all we need to do is go to our levels and let's make this very percussive and a nice shot like that. So that's what's kind of mean. So it's modifying just that beginning. And if we play around with the ratios, there we go. So now we've got that more percussive sound on the beginning. If we bring back the other one as well, and we haven't touched operator 6 yet. I think anything else would make this too complex. Let's have a listen. Yeah, that probably wasn't. So in this case, that's probably done. I've made the bell sound. And that's enough. So let's have a look at some of the other pieces before I look at some of the other techniques in FM. So as you can hear that, now let's put some filter on it. So traditional analog style filter. And I could lower that down like that. And if we go to the filter envelope, which is number 2, and put the full amount. So now you. So there you can hear that filter going on it. And different filters have a different sound. You can hear the difference there when you switch to the MS-20. You can actually see the filter sweeping down there, can't you? I could go the other way. So you can see you've got the filter there. So I'll show you an example of sort of creating an analog sound with a filter. I'm going to leave the filter open for now. Instead, if I put a high pass filter on there, works well with string sounds. You can cut out the lower part and have sort of nice high string sounds on there. I could apply some LFO. Now we could do that to the. Let's do that to oscillator operator 2s. So we're going to operator 2, and you can see if we go to LFO 2. And operator and LFO 2, LFO 1 is used for this in this case. And we can fade it in as well. We probably can't hit if I fade it in like that. So that's quite a nice bit. Yeah, so we can fade it in like that as well. So 1 is for the pitch, and 2 is for the filter. So we can have filter LFO. And 3 you can use for something else. So we'll have a look at that shortly. Right, let's go over to the effects now. Let's add some effects on there. Effect 1, I'm going to actually switch, and I'm going to use one of these. You can see all the different effects you've got. It's a bit of chorus. Sounds quite good. Effect 2, I'm going to have some. Let's have some tape echo. And the reverb then. Let's have some. And you see you can choose all these different types. And actually what I do like as well is nice spring reverb. Or even a shimmer. And I could just roll that top end off a little bit. Like that. So that's kind of used a combination of those things there. Now what we could do, we can use velocity, and that's a trick to make something sound more responsive. So if you want the level, if you want to be quieter when you with velocity, you turn it on the carriers like that. If I put it on the modulators, you'll hear it, the velocity affects the tone. So that's a trick for making things more velocity. I'd say. So you can do both to compensate for that if you want, but you can. Now, virtual patching is something that's definitely worth playing around with. Virtual patching is something worth having a look at. We'll have a look at that in a sec. So that is one example of a sound, of a typical FM sound. One of the other options you've got on here. Let's have a look at some of the ones I've created here. These are all the ones I've created. Right, so now I want to show you something more about these different FM types. Each one of these types needs its own video. So I've already done one on the Opsix for FM, and we'll be looking at some of these other ones, but I did want to introduce them now to give you a brief idea what they are. So far what you've been hearing is frequency modulation. So here's two pairs being modulated. If I change that to ring modulation, it uses a different method. It uses ring modulation, like on an analog synth ring mod, which you get very different effects, subtler. but you really hear the difference when you start to do frequency changes. So you can see that's using ring mod. The other thing as well when you're in this mode is, so with ring mod, you've got a shape of it as well. And the depth control. So you can still get some really interesting sounds out of it. Especially for bell light times. That sounds really nice bell sound, isn't it? But I find it subtler than FM. I'm going to do a separate video on that because I'm not really doing it justice in that. But that's ring mod. The other one you've got is filter. So this is a traditional analog filter. Now this time when we do it, I'm going to put this back to 1. There's some extra options here. One of them is its own oscillator, so it can hear itself. Normally you can't hear the own oscillator of a carry. So this is now, we're on filter. Filter is an analog style filter, which here the output of this one and its own oscillator as well, or you can turn that down, which I will for now. Turn this up a bit. So you can hear that sine wave. Now what will make more interesting, and you can do this with FM as well, but that again is a topic is you don't have to use sine waves like we've been doing so far. There's other waveforms in there, so plus some additives. If you think analog, we've got a filter, analog synthesizer. If you pass a sine wave through a filter, you're not going to hear very much because it's not really anything to filter out. We put a sawtooth in there, and there's 2 sawtooths as well. One of them takes more CPU power, but it's a smoother one. I think you can hear it in the dynamic range, but again, I'll save that for a separate video. Let's go with a saw. There you can hear a sawtooth wave. And now if we start to play with the filter cutoff, you're into that traditional analog type. And you've got different modes as well for your filters, just as we did earlier on. So you've got low pass, high band pass, high pass. The MG ones are Moog style ones, and these MS-20. Let's look at the MS-20 one. So now you're thinking like an analog synth. So we've got an oscillator and a filter. And where you can get interesting, I've used this on a couple of instances. You could split this and say, go with this method or this algorithm. And so you can think of that as having 3 oscillators and 3 independent filters. Now, the other thing you could do is you could not have it separate filters and just use the main filter and have 6, like this one, 6 oscillators, independent oscillators with their own waveform, pitch, tuning, everything else. So you can make some really big analog type sounds. But for what I want to do for now, let's just switch, keep it with this one. I wanted to show you what the filters look like when they're embedded. Why would you want to do these filters embedded? Well, you can do combination of things. So you could have, say here, there's your filter, and you could have a sawtooth and a square wave going into a filter. So like an analog synth. So you can model, say, a PolySix or a dual filter, a dual oscillator one, like Prophet 5 maybe. And you could also, on the other side, we can have a sawtooth going to a Moog filter and a low pass and a high pass, creating a band pass filter. So you've got 3 filters and 3 oscillators there going independent paths. So if you're an analog synth programmer, imagine if you could take the inputs and outputs and repatch them anywhere like a modular synth. All these could be any combination you want. So all they sort of stack down. So here you could have a sawtooth passing through all these different filters, or you could just have, you could use FM synthesis on this chain, or a bit of combination of both. So you can imagine the complexity you can get. But anyway, that's a filter passing through that filter. And of course you can envelope it and everything else because it has its own envelope. So I can, and we can pass it through that way. The really interesting thing is it's tuned as well. So if I put it as fixed and start, you can hear that's like the frequency on, you know, you turn the big frequency on a. And if I put some release on them, so interesting effects already. And when I put that was pitched in that sort of fixed mode, but we can make it in ratio mode, and it's like key tracking. But you've got key tracking as well, so you can see how interesting it gets. But there's nothing to stop you passing the output of that through another FM oscillator in one of these different stacks. So you really have got a lot of options. Right, what else have we got? Filter FM. Difference between filter and filter FM. This one works more like FM, where this is modifying that wave, but instead of modifying the wave, it modifies the filter. So you modify it's basically adjusting that cutoff. So if you've got, think analog synth, you've got a low pass LFO on your filter. Imagine you can get up into high audio rate and you can do something really interesting. Let's just make it sine wave for now, and I'm going to slow it right down as I possibly can. So let's have a look at that. So you can see it apply. That is like LFO. It's open and close the filter, but as I get higher, I'm getting to audio rate, and you get some interesting effects. You can have a high pass. So interesting effects already. So that's what filter FM is. It's modifying the cutoff based on the output. Think of it like a filter LFO, but super high audio rates. And then you've got Wavefolder, definitely a subject for its own video, but I can show you briefly what it looks like. Let's just change that envelope slightly for now. We'll turn off our LFO. I think we've got some LFO on there. There we go. Right. So let me increase the levels on this, and you can start to see what it does. And you've got a gain control. So imagine if I go back to this, turn this level down a bit on this operator, and let's look at the envelope, and let's go back to making this sharper. And then using Wavefolder, I've got some really interesting sounds off the multi-poly, so you can create like almost like guitar type sounds, and you can create really rich sounds that sound like synthesis that you would do through filters without using a filter. Imagine you've got 6 of those, combine that together, and you can make some interesting effects. And don't forget, you've got different waveforms to what you can do with that. Then you've got an effect. This is, I've kind of thought, what do you want to use it for? Actually, you end up with some interesting effects when you use the effects. And I found these better to work as modulators. So you get your oscillator or your operator to pass a signal through, it does something, and it goes to the next stage. But I can demonstrate it on here. So look what effects have we've got. We've got a peak EQ, we've got a phaser, even got a short delay. Listen to this. Can you hear that slight delay? But that's not using audio delay, that's using modulation of a delay, so you can do, and you can turn off its own volume as well. So you can imagine you can then use the output of that to modulate FM. You can definitely get some interesting effects out of that you couldn't just do standard FM. So that's why I kind of find it better in the middle of the stack. But you've got phasers, you've got distortion, so you can really change that wave shape. So it does exactly what you think they would do, but they're not doing it in the audio, they're doing it to the wave shape and or the waveform. And then you've got wave shaping again. So you've got a lot of interesting options on that as well. And then you've got a bypass and a mute as well. So here is something that I created. This is a custom algorithm. So in this case, I've made operator 6 be the carrier and all the others feed into it. Why would I want to do that? Well, it means I can have operator 6, which I've created as a filter, and the others are oscillators, like analog oscillators. So imagine you've got analog synth with a filter and 5 independent oscillators that feed into that, and you can get some nice effect from that, because you've got 6 different, so I've got a sine wave and sawtooths and all feeding into that, and you still got the overall filter as well. So that's a good idea of a custom algorithm. Here's one doing a similar thing but using the opposite way around. So I've got one oscillator feeding into, let's get this right terminology. I've got one operator, which in this case is just a sawtooth, and it feeds into 5 filters. So imagine you have your analog synth with an oscillator producing a sawtooth, and it goes into 5 separate filters. Here's one where I've got all 6 operating independently and with different waveforms on there, and using the mod wheel it should work. It switches, you can hear it switching those waveforms. This is an example of the pairs. A very traditional sort of FM synthesis where you've got 2 operator pairs producing orchestral sounds or string sounds at different pitches and levels to make that sort of orchestra sound. I mentioned about the PolySix. It's actually got the PolySix filters on there. So this is an example of using the PolySix filter. Very simple one, that's just using that single oscillator. But I think where FM is really great is in sort of touch sensitivity and response to velocity. So that's a really good example of that. There are some other areas which I haven't looked at. It's got an arpeggiator, a motion sequencer, which is well worth looking at, and an audio sequencer as well. I'll be looking at that in future videos. It's got a traditional sort of step sequencer, or you can record it and have the sort of loop sequencer on there as well, and an arpeggiator, like I said. So I don't want to go any further onto it, and I'm going to go into separate videos on the Opsix itself. So if you want to follow along, just check out my Opsix videos. It's exactly the same for both of these as well. Just a couple of things to finish off. If you are wanting to save your patches, you can just save them like that. And if you want to import DX7 patches, I've got a separate video on that. Just search on my YouTube channel, import the SysEx, browse for the SysEx file, and I've got some in here. And So I've got some in here. I've got loads of them you can get off the internet. Bring them in like that, and then they should be there like that. And those are the ones that I've brought in. There is some tricks. The envelopes aren't the same, so you've got to do some things, but then you can add effects and all the other bits and pieces as well. So thanks for watching the video. I hope that helps. As I'm getting started with the Opsix Native, the rest of the ones will probably concentrate on the Opsix hardware, but they're exactly the same. So thanks for watching this video. Thanks for the suggestion, by the way, for doing the video, and I'll see you on the next one.